my fellow wizards, it's a brand new year and therefore the perfect time to talk about all the changes Wizard101 has made, but more importantly, all the changes they still need to make. Because whether it's the PvE or PvP crowd, wizheads are always ready with a laundry list of things they would like to be different, for better or worse. This is my third year making this type of video, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I do want to give credit where credit is due and quickly cover all the changes the devs did make from my 2024 video, which I'll also link below. We got better spell card descriptions that actually allow you to mouse over different symbols to see what they do, so it's not just hieroglyphics anymore, so shout out to the developer Calamity for working on that. We also got new dungeon level scaling options with the Scales of Knowledge item, which allow you to level scale your wizard down in earlier dungeons so you can farm spellements and other previously level locked drops. And finally, the devs fixed Arch Mastery so that your chance to gain a school pip is only measured against the enemy's stats and not your teammates, which is a huge quality of life update. However, while there has been a lot of positive changes like these in recent years, there's still plenty of things the community desperately wants and a bunch of stuff the devs could improve upon, so let's dive into the top 10 things Wizard101 needs to change in 2025. Number 10. Move back the paywall. I feel like this comes up every single year, and yet after 16 years of Wizard101, the community is still waiting for KingsIsle to move back that nasty paywall.
Let me in! Let me in!
In recent years, KingsIsle has offered multiple promotions for a free-to-play Wizard City and Krakatopia, or even the whole first arc free from Wizard City to Dragonspire for a limited period of time, but none of these has led to a permanent change in the location of the paywall, which still sits firmly in the middle of Wizard City's questline, which has left a lot of players frustrated. Now, my understanding is that currently KingsIsle doesn't want to push back the paywall because it doesn't make financial sense to them based on the rate of players they are converting from free-to-play to paying members. However, I see over and over again new players talking about how the paywall appears far too soon for them to feel like they're getting to play enough of the game to decide whether or not it's worth paying membership or buying crowns to continue questing. I personally have tried to convert multiple friends to Wiz over the years, and every time they hit the paywall, they didn't want to pay to play anymore, which is a huge bummer because this game needs new players to survive long term, and I really think if they got to experience more of what the game has to offer, they might have been convinced to stay and become paying members. So while I understand KingsIsle's stance on the issue, I really think they should at minimum consider making all of Wizard City free and maybe even Krakatopia as well, because it really does feel like a disservice to potential new players to only give them maybe an hour or two max of playtime before throwing that paywall in their face. Obviously, some players want the whole first arc free or even more, but I think we can almost all agree that the paywall comes too early. Number 9. Spellement conversion. Spellements have been a hot button issue ever since they released, especially the grind surrounding getting all your spells upgraded, but thankfully I will say in recent years that updates like the Scales of Knowledge for level scaling in older dungeons and the Portal of Peril crafting rewards, it has become a lot easier to farm spellements in general. However, I think one aspect of spellements that hasn't been addressed is what do you do when you have an excess of spellements that you don't have any use for? I, for example, have a bunch of extra Krampus and Reindeer Knight spellements that are just sitting unused in my shared bank collecting dust, so it'd be great to put them to use elsewhere, which is why I'm proposing the devs add a spellement conversion mechanic where players can use spellements they don't need to craft spellements they do need. We already have a similar option in place for crafting spellements with fortune coins by playing through the Portal of Peril events, where you can essentially trade a certain number of coins for different types of spellements, either school-specific, different ranks, or even lore master spellements. So I'd like to build off that and have an option to trade in spellements in general to convert into other spellements. Now, I doubt the devs would be happy with a 1-to-1 conversion rate, but even if you needed to convert 2 to 5 unwanted spellements to get one spellement that you actually wanted, I think it would be a great quality of life change and offer players another way to not only get more spellements in general, but also actually have a use for unwanted spellements that are otherwise just piling up in their backpacks. Number 8. More cosmetic options. This is another request that comes up basically all the time in the community, but people want more cosmetic and stitching options. I will say that in the past year, the Wiz stitching community has been eating well with some amazing looking gear from the Fanciful Fairy Key and Winter Witch packs to name a few, but it would still be great to get more options in the crown shop like new and more diverse hairstyles and obviously the mythic color wheel that people have been asking for years. There's definitely a limited selection of hairstyles, most of which aren't exactly super diverse, though KingsIsle has indicated they may be working on supporting more hairstyles in the future, which would be great. It's been forever since they added anything new to the hairstyle section of the Crown Shop, so it would be awesome to see some new additions there this year. And as a side note, I'd love to be able to dye those hairstyles as desired like we can with the other hairstyles from stuff like packs, because basically whatever color hair you buy from the Crown Shop hairstyles is what you're stuck with forever, which is kind of annoying. I'd also love to see more cosmetic options in general. For example, in Pirate 101, there are so many different tattoos, face paints, masks, and glasses that you can buy compared to Wizard 101, so I'd love to see a similar variety added to this game, whether as free options in the Magic Mirror, or even premium options in the Crown Shop. Cause the current school symbol tattoos just kind of remind me of like a toddler's poorly applied face paint at a low-budget county fair. And obviously, there's the color wheel that basically everyone would love to see. At the moment, players have very limited options when it comes to dyeing outfits, and a lot of recent pack gear also has just been undyeable in general, which kind of sucks. Years ago, there were leaks that KI was working on an RGB dyeing system for gear where players would be able to change different values to create custom colors for dyeing. However, that feature has yet to materialize, and it seems like the devs either scrapped the idea entirely or simply haven't been able to get it working. Given the state of the Rate My Stitch event, it's clear that the player base needs better color and stitch options in general, or we might just witness Maxwell abracadabra himself after looking at these abominations all day. Number 7. Mount and pet stitching. We're kind of hitting on a couple different subjects here, but basically there are mounts and pets that players would love to use for cosmetic reasons, but they end up stuck with the best meta choices instead for the sake of min-maxing their builds. So many times the only mounts and pets people use end up being ones that boost stats like Pierce, Damage, Pip Chance, and more, or ones that offer set bonuses like the Frillosaur pets and Bronto mounts. Similarly, certain pets are also chosen just for the item cards they give rather than their appearance, so everyone ends up looking like carbon copies of each other. Well, more than usual, I guess. However, if we could somehow stitch mounts and pets, or basically just trade the bonus stats, set bonuses, or item cards to other options, players could finally use their favorite looking mounts and pets without having to sacrifice their overall builds. For instance, I'd love to trade my Clockwork Courser's Pierce stat to something like my Wolf of Winter or Bookworm mount, because I personally think they look way cooler. And the community has been calling for this exact change for a long time. As I discussed in last year's video, in June 2023, the Atmoplex community suggested the idea of making mount jewel slots that would allow players to swap different stat boosting jewels between their various mounts. So you could, for instance, take the school damage boost from a Gulcher mount and transfer it to a different mount by unsocketing and resocketing the jewel. Ratbeard himself endorsed the idea on one of his streams, but we have yet to see the idea come to fruition. It would be great to see a similar idea implemented with pets, but with item card jewel slots instead. So just like socketing different stat boosting jewels on mounts, we could instead change which item cards pets give and assign or socket them to different pets so you aren't stuck with just one pet because of the useful item card or set bonus it gives. It would be great, for instance, to move the very useful blade item cards from one pet to another to basically make a custom pet that is both the looks and stats you want. Honestly, I'm pretty sure people would be happy to spend a few crowns for the privilege of stitching various mount and pet stats and item cards, so this could be a win-win for both KI and the player base. Then people would finally be free to equip the pets they really want, and definitely not because they're demonically possessed or anything. Yep, perfectly normal. Number 6, more rewards for side activities. While there are a bunch of fun events like Beast Moon Hunt, Portal of Peril, and Decathlon that give players unique rewards to collect, there are still several side activities that could use some more attention and better incentives for participating, such as badge collecting, housing decorating, fishing, and more. For instance, we got a great update to badges recently, where players now get gold skeleton keys for acquiring certain badges, but it would be awesome to see those rewards expanded to include stuff like cosmetic gear, permanent mounts, unique furniture items, and more for collecting a certain number of badges. Similarly, it would be great to see more rewards for raiding houses, like this Nightmare Fuel, or reaching certain ranks on the housing leaderboards for the decorators out there. For fishing, players could earn better fishing gear from reaching certain ranks, or maybe finding a certain number of unique species of fish. And for events like Rate My Stitch, we do already have some interesting cosmetic rewards to work toward, like new emotes and teleports, but it would be nice to see them expanded even further to incentivize player participation. In the most recent update, the developers offered cosmetic gear items for anyone who grinded out all the challenge mode badges in Selenopolis, which I'm sure made the furries out there very happy. And it was a really cool idea, so it just makes sense to me to use a similar philosophy to reward players taking part in other side activities that just haven't gotten any new updates or new rewards in many years. Basically, across the board, give us more cool stuff to work toward that doesn't just involve advanced content. Number 5, fix gold skeleton key team-ups. I can't believe this issue is still ongoing, but here we are, folks. Basically, all the way back in the summer of 2022, KI added a bunch of new gold skeleton key bosses and reworked other existing key bosses, but in the process, they basically broke players' ability to use the team-up feature for those bosses. The new versions of the bosses had different tier difficulties depending on the level of the players entering them, and thus different level drops, but issues quickly arose when these dungeons automatically scaled to the lowest level wizard in a group, and if any higher level wizards were also in the group, they would no longer be allowed to get drops. So essentially, higher level players were punished for helping lower level players farm these key bosses and given no real drops themselves besides participation trophies, which are currently a useless reagent that only serve as a slap in the face to wizards who wasted a gold key on the boss. Like, the audacity is unreal here. Anyway, this design choice ended up affecting team-ups because you can't actually see other players' levels when teaming up for a dungeon, so inevitably a bunch of different level players would get grouped together, and then people would get extremely frustrated when they wouldn't get drops because there happened to be a lower level in the group. So instead of fixing the issue by, for instance, creating different level tiered team-ups for people to join, KI just disabled most of the gold skeleton key team-ups and have to this day never fixed the problem. So here's my proposal. Option 1, KI could just stop punishing higher level players for helping lower level players and give them drops regardless, since they basically implemented this whole design to fix what I think is a non-existent issue of higher level players helping lower levels farm bosses, then created an even bigger issue by disabling team up. Or option 2, which would be to implement Portal of Peril's level scaling mechanic where lower level wizards' stats are scaled up to the higher level wizards in the group, and everyone can farm and get gear as usual, so everyone can equally participate in the dungeon together. Obviously, Portal of Peril currently has its own bugs that the devs have been trying to fix, including the level scaling, but once they get it figured out, I don't see why they couldn't use the same system for gold key bosses and team up. Whatever the developers decide, I just don't think it's acceptable at this point to leave the gold skeleton key bosses in their current state because it really creates a huge hassle to farm them for players who don't have a large friend group to rely on, and also friends in the exact same level bracket as them, and gold keys take a lot of effort to get in the first place. Like, can we just finally address this, please? Number 4, more spell weaving options. I think spell weaving has definitely gotten a lot of mixed reviews from the player base, with a number of people initially really excited for the new system, only to later be a bit disappointed when most of the new spells and fusions heavily favored PvP and advanced content. And the devs definitely have plans to expand spell weaving in future updates, which is awesome, but in the meantime, I want to discuss some changes and additions that I think would benefit this system. First and foremost, I think PvE-focused players would love to see more options on the table that benefit them while questing and fighting bosses in regular combat, because right now it often just does not make sense to use most of the spell weaving options over their regular spells, except in very niche situations. So whether it be more AoEs, strong single hits, or even more interesting utility spells like we got with the new Purge and Impair spells, players want stuff that's actually useful in regular PvE. Heck, I'd even take spells that do similar damage to our existing AoE and single target spells, but just have a different attack animation. I've used Tempest and Stormlord so many times at this point, I'm kind of just wanting to hit the fast forward button each time because my eyes keep glazing over. Tempest goes hard still, but I'm desperate for something new to look at. I've also seen frustration from some players that they can only get spells from their weaving school and not their native school. So for instance, as a storm wizard weaving into balance, I can only get spells from the balance school, and I can't train the awesome storm plates that the storm school gets, which is kind of a bummer. I think it'd be great to be able to cross-train weaving spells from both our native and weaving school to get the benefits of both at the same time. Finally, while the badge labors required to finish each rank of the weaving schools were heavily reduced from Test Realm, they still feel rather tedious and out of place compared to the regular story-based quests that have you delving into the history and strengths and weaknesses of each school as you rank up. It still just feels like busy work with no real purpose or place in the lore of spell weaving as a mechanic, and I'm of the opinion it should just be removed entirely from the quest lines. Each storyline quest for ranking up has enough content and challenge with the multiple difficult fights and the understanding and use of gambits required that I think the labors could just be taken out and the rest left as is. The labors truly are the least enjoyable part of participating in spellweaving, and I think they are far more of a disservice to players than anything positive, besides adding meaningless padding to the total time players spend playing the game. Number 3. Gear crafting pity changes. Gear crafting pity systems have had many changes over the course of the last few years. In earlier worlds, you basically have to farm bosses until you get a lucky drop if you want the best gear. In later areas, you sometimes need to farm for multiple lower tier gear pieces and reagents in order to craft the higher tier pieces. And in Wallaroo, you need to earn badges by defeating bosses a certain number of times and farm reagents in order to craft the best gear available, assuming you don't get a lucky drop first. Obviously, people will have different preferences for how these pity systems should be designed, but I'm a pretty big fan of the current Wallaroo version since in my experience it lowers the overall grind for getting the best gear. Thankfully, it seems the developers agree, and in recent live streams they've suggested that they might go back and change earlier gear farming methods to match Wallaroo's, which I think would be a great quality of life change that makes all the current gear pity methods the same, rather than the current version where it varies wildly depending on what level and world you're at. However, that doesn't mean there can't be further improvements made. In addition to making all the pity systems the same, it would be great if you could break down unwanted gear pieces into useful reagents and crafting components in order to earn the best gear you want that much quicker. So if we're adopting the Wallaroo pity system, for instance, you normally need to beat bosses a certain number of times to earn a badge, which then allows you to craft the gear you want, assuming you don't just get the gear to drop when farming the boss normally. Once you have the badge, you then need to get a certain number of different reagents like Dreamwater and Dreamstone in order to craft the gear. Dreamwater drops from most endgame bosses, and Dreamstone can be harvested throughout Wallaroo. However, you usually still have to farm bosses a decent amount to get all the reagents you need, and in the meantime you're likely getting a lot of off-school drops, like maybe you're a Storm Wizard but keep getting life school gear. So wouldn't it be a nice addition if you could take that off-school gear that you don't want and break down that gear to get more of the Dreamwater or Dreamstone reagents you need to craft the gear you do want? Even if we just got a moderate amount of reagents from this type of mechanic, it would definitely make each boss run feel more meaningful, and players would be happier to get off-school gear because they can either keep it and trade it to their other wizards, or break it down for more reagents to craft the gear they actually want, which in my book is a win-win. With a few tweaks, I think this could work really well for most existing dungeons, and it would be great to see better pity systems applied in general to dungeons like Waterworks or Darkmoor, where let's just say the quality of the players in teamup are not always the best. Huge shout out to the Frenzy Gamer, by the way, for helping develop this idea, but let me know in the comments what other pity system improvements you'd like to see the devs add. Number 9. Pack Pity. And speaking of pity systems, let's talk about the desperate need for pack pity in Wiz. If you played this game for any period of time, you've probably heard at least a few horror stories of people spending hundreds of dollars at a time to open specific packs, only to never get the thing they wanted, which is a huge bummer and definitely encourages gambling-like behavior in a game that is still heavily marketed towards families and children, though I will say that the demographics have shifted over the years. Regardless, when activities like PvP encourage players to grind to get every possible edge they can in order to win, those packs begin to look incredibly tempting. If a player can just get that lucky pack to spit out a Chompy Bronto or School Gulcher mount, they can get a few extra damage percentages and then they might have a better chance at winning their next match. Which is why it's high time we had some kind of pity system where you're guaranteed to get the item you want after spending a certain amount of crowns. Gacha games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and many others have become incredibly popular and lucrative in recent years, and they all have loot pity systems where after opening a certain number of loot boxes, you're guaranteed to get certain items or characters, so I'd love to see a similar system or concept come to Wizard101. A pack pity system could function in a number of different ways, but it would be great to be able to pick one item out from all the available contents of a pack once you spend a certain number of crowns or open a certain number of packs as a free bonus reward before the counter resets again. Another option might be that we can turn in a certain number of temporary mounts in order to get a permanent version of the mount, or you can trade in pieces of unwanted gear to get the school gear you actually want, similar to existing gear crafting pity systems we already have in the game. Obviously, packs make up a huge amount of KingsIsle's revenue, so they are going to be very hesitant to change anything, but I think implementing a pack pity system could still benefit them financially. Obviously, they lose out on some revenue because whales wouldn't need to open as many packs to get what they need, but this type of system might also encourage more of the average player base to open more packs than they otherwise would because they know there's something they can actually work toward rather than just getting ripped off repeatedly. I just think it's something worth experimenting with or at least discussing for the sake of the longevity of the game. Number 1. Fix the bazaar and add player trading. As many of you have no doubt experienced, the bazaar is currently, not looking great. After a recent update which included a revamp of the entire bazaar, players noticed a less than desirable addition from the devs, which is that there is now a delay between selling items and then showing up to purchase at the bazaar. Now, some people claim it's a 30-minute delay, but others say it can be a bit more random interval of minutes, so it's not exactly clear how much time passes, but there's definitely a delay, and it's kind of ruined the player economy in the process. Since there is no player-to-player trading system besides treasure cards, the bazaar was unofficially used to trade items between players by having one player sell the desired item to the bazaar before having the recipient quickly find it and buy it before any other players could, which is kind of a risky option, but it served players well enough. With the new delay, however, players cannot use the bazaar to reliably trade anymore, which is incredibly frustrating. According to the devs, they made this change both to combat botting and prevent players scamming other players, but also because the bazaar being used as a means to trade between players was never intended in the first place and was actually a, quote, exploit used to circumvent the intended original design, which is, definitely an interesting take. Although I will say this language was walked back at a later date. Unfortunately, this change has had far more negative consequences than positive ones, as it did not actually fix the botting problem, since bots can literally monitor the bazaar 24 hours a day and still snatch up desirable items, while human players cannot, and trading between players was also a positive social interaction, with the bazaar acting as a kind of community hub in the same way the commons act as a hub for the player base. Before the change, I would commonly see players helping other players out by selling the reagents they needed for crafting, or otherwise offering assistance, which was great to see, but the new system has completely removed this positive community interaction for no real benefit. In addition, there are many other bugs related to the bazaar update that have yet to be fixed, including no reagents showing up except the basic reagents you'd already find for sale from NPCs in Wizard City, which has basically ruined crafting for most of the player base, since you now have to grind for almost every single reagent rather than being able to purchase them in bulk from the bazaar. There also seems to be a number of items that just aren't showing up at all now, especially at lower levels. According to the devs, it looks like certain items just aren't being posted through at all when sold, which is concerning, but essentially the overall stock of available items is just way down, with certain level bracketed gear just not showing up at all. Now, obviously, some of these bugs should hopefully be fixed eventually by the devs, but we will still be left with the new delay for items showing up, which is definitely on purpose. At minimum, I hope the devs consider reverting the change and allowing the bazaar to function with no delay like it used to, especially since the change has done nothing to combat botting, but I also think it's worth discussing if it's time that Wiz players just got player-to-player trading, which people have wanted since the game's release. Clearly, the devs are anti-peer-to-peer trading due to concerns about scamming and the effects this would have on the game's economy, but many, if not most, successful MMOs have some form of player trading, including World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, Final Fantasy, New World, and EVE Online, to name a few. And even if the devs aren't willing to let players trade everything in the game, even just adding the option to trade furniture or reagents like we can already trade treasure cards would be a big improvement. Obviously, there's pros and cons to any trading system, but I think the devs disregarded a pillar of community engagement and positive social interaction when they removed the ability to trade using the bazaar, and it has led to one of the biggest outcries I've seen from the player base in a while. There are so many comments in the feedback section of the official Wiz Discord that mention their frustrations with the bazaar changes, and though the devs claim they're working on fixing the actual bugs, which should solve some issues, it's been several months at this point and the problems are still not fixed, with programming priorities clearly concentrated elsewhere. The point is, whether we get player trading outright or just a reversion back to the old bazaar, something needs to change here, because you can't just completely destroy an established trading system that has been used for 16 years and acted as a key source of positive community interaction and just general convenience, and then justify it by saying it was never intended and players have been exploiting this entire time. The devs seem to think including player trading will negatively harm the game, but I think removing it entirely, as they're trying to do here, will have far more negative consequences in the long run from a community standpoint. Alright, my fellow wizards, those were my top 10 changes Wizard101 needs to make in 2025. Definitely let me know what changes you'd personally like to see this year in the comments below, especially in regards to the bazaar situation, because this is the most I've seen the player base fired up in a while. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really does help me to make more amazing Wiz content for you all. And if you want to support me and the channel further, you can hit the join button below to become one of my awesome channel members. As always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing!